Hello, today I'm with Larry Pahl, who's absolutely fantastic researcher into the pyramids and much else besides, the Book of Enoch and all sorts of esoteric subjects. So it's absolutely fantastic to have you today, Larry. And happy solstice. Today's the solstice.
Happy solstice, that's right. It's the first full day of summer today, and it is indeed the solstice. So Melissa, thanks for having me. It's nice to be with you. And yeah, it's a special day. Happy solstice.
Yeah, it's great. And actually, I'm apologies if I look really bleached. My desk is next to a window, and I think it's just the light coming in. So I look like a bit of a ghost.
Yeah,
but sorry
you
about
look
that.
anointed. Yes,
It's the solstice, so we'll just have to
Yeah,
celebrate.
there you
the
go.
sun.
That's right. Well, that's what
here.
you want on the solstice, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So Larry, you've been researching, well, in particular, the Great Pyramid for a long time. How did it all get started for you?
I would say that somehow, as a young man, I got interested in prophecy.
Yeah.
So I read all of Nostradamus's prophecies. I studied Edgar Cayce. I looked at biblical prophecy, anything that was prophecy. I just thought it's a fascinating idea that someone can foretell the future, you know?
Yeah.
And then someone told me, I can't remember who, that the Great Pyramid was a prophecy. And I said, what? So I started studying the Great Pyramid, and that actually kind of took me away from prophecy because I just got enthralled with the Great Pyramid and then ultimately pyramids and then megaliths. But then it sort of, it sort of came full circle because the prophecies of Enoch, or about Enoch, say that, or actually not just the prophecies, the ancient legends about Enoch say that he would have a repository of all the ancient secrets, the science, the math, and from his world, and so that was going to be called the Pillar of Enoch. And so many people think that's the Great Pyramid. I don't think that Enoch built the Great Pyramid, but I do think somehow he probably had a hand in the plans that got to those that did build it. And so inside the pyramid there, and so the second thing that the ancient writings about Enoch said, besides that there would be this repository of ancient knowledge, it also said there would be warnings about things to come. And so those are the two main, things that are said about what Enoch would leave. So I started to move in that direction now. So again, it's full circle. I went from studying prophecy, then I moved into studying megaliths and all the amazing things. And now I'm being led to search in the megaliths for what I believe is there. And, certain researchers have given intimations of it. Our friend Dennis once in a while finds things that seem to be prophetic in the Giza Plateau. And let's see, in the book, the Giza Prophecy, they talk about a timeline that's in there. Gary Osborne has done some stuff with that. Robert Grant's talking about the zodiac being in the king's chamber. And so if you can find where we are in that. So the point is, there are indications that there could be prophetic indications of warnings of things to come or prophecies of things to come. So that's one of my main things I'm beginning to look for now, in studying ancient megaliths.
And do you think that from such a far-reaching time, they can still speak to us? They're still relevant, and if we're looking for that sort of information in the pyramids, in the megaliths.
I do think that a couple of reasons. There must have been some sort of divine revelation, and in a sense, I just made a presentation. I was asked to teach a class at the local community college, Roane State Community College, about the mysteries of Egypt. And because this is the Bible Belt here, I talked about it. I've got a number of books on my shelf that are written from a Christian point of view about the Great Pyramid. And some people are freaked out by that, like, where'd that come from? But the claim of these books is that the passage systems in the Great Pyramid are a replica or a intimation of Christian theology. And so I went over with the class how really Christian theology is one of the best explanations for all the passages in the Great Pyramid. Zahiawas, the great Egyptologist, will talk about how the air shafts in the king's chamber especially could be airways for the pharaoh to go out to the stars. But if you take the rest of Egyptian theology, why a king's chamber? Why a grand gallery? Why a queen's chamber? Why a queen's chamber passage? Those are, I've never really seen adequately explained and connected to Egyptian theology. But the Christian interpreters have shown how there's a very profound connection between the Exodus, the time of the flood, the concept of heaven and hell, the crucifixion of Jesus, and it all fits spatially and chronologically. Because if you take an inch for a year, just like we talked about, some researchers take an inch for a month in studying megaliths and stuff. So these researchers said for inch for a year, and there seems to be a connection there. So how could that be? If there's any truth to that, how could that be? And so if Enoch had prophetic ability or was shown things from God, because the book of Jude in the New Testament, the Bible, Enoch prophesies the second coming of Christ. Now, most people would say the second coming of Christ hasn't happened yet. So here's Enoch prophesying an event that hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. Well, if he's able to do that, if God showed him things about the second coming, couldn't God have shown him things about the first coming, about the story of Jesus and dying on the cross and all of that? And so that's how you could explain that Christian theology could, get into the Great Pyramid, because Enoch was shown these things in the past. Because the Great Pyramid's like thousands of years older than the Bible. Well,
that's kind of an issue.
A lot of books have this perspective. So here's one that says ancient Egyptian roots of Christianity. So they're saying that the resurrection theme in Christianity came from the Horus Osiris story in Egypt. So the resurrection story starts in Egypt, the book says, and then Christianity. But the other explanation, because this is one obviously, but the other explanation would be no, the Egyptian story of redemption came from the stories that were in the world from Enoch before the Egyptian civilization. And so really it was those that got into Egyptian theology with the resurrection of the story of Osiris and Horus and all of that. So it's just interesting. Could I show you a couple slides that relate to that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Let me see if we can get this on the screen real quick here. So share the screen. I'll share the whole screen. I'll share this one, and then I'll go.
There are so many things in common between all the religions. So we're bound to find similarities, aren't we?
Sure, that's right. Okay. Oh boy, I must have closed the one I wanted to do. So let me open a recent one. Okay, this one. All right, so let's just take. Well, let's do this one right here. Let me show this. Okay, so can you see this? So this is. Okay, so I've got the title up at the top is Core Theologies. This is the inside of the Great Pyramid. Everybody knows this is the passage systems inside the Great Pyramid. And again, the Great Pyramid is the only pyramid in the world with the upper passage systems, the one that go into the body of the pyramid. No other Egyptian pyramids have this, so it's unique that way, okay? So this is the idea that at the entrance there, that's, the downward course of this world, the fallen nature of man leads to kind of the subterranean chamber, the pit, hell or whatever. But there's a way that breaks off that goes up toward, up, like, heaven up, hell down. And so it goes through, and then it goes up to a king's chamber, and then there's an empty sarcophagus. And so the first ascending passage is low. So even though it's headed up, you have to duck to go through it. And so, these Christian writers have said that's the Jewish dispensation, the era of, the Jews or whatever. And so it's a revelation in darkness sort of, but then you've got this grand gallery, and they say it represents the 2,000 years of, the age of Pisces, or the age of, Christianity or whatever. And then this point down here at the beginning of the first ascended passage are the granite plugs, what are called the granite plugs, which prevent access. No one has ever gone from the entrance passage of the Great Pyramid up to the King's Chamber by going through the beginning of the first ascending passage. It's plugged by granite. And so what symbolically that could represent the law, because the only other place in the pyramid where there's granite is up in the king's chamber, which if you take that to represent heaven, then you're saying that the 10 commandments, the law, are holy or they're from God, but they prevent anyone from making it to heaven because they're a perfect standard. No one can never steal, never kill, never have bad thoughts. So it's just interesting that those granite plugs, happen to fit in with this Christian theology. And then, of course, the cross, because again, if you take the beginning of the granite plugs to be the beginning of the Exodus and count the number of inches from that point to the junction point where the Grand Gallery rises, it's about the number of years to the time of Jesus. And so,
Okay.
and then Jesus, the idea of the Queen's Chamber, the theology is that Jesus redeemed the earth. He won the new earth, which will be in the age to come. And, and then the dead end passage down there represents like the end, the end of those that, go to hell or whatever you want to say there. And then the antechamber up there would be the time of tribulation. Most different Christian sects talk about a time of tribulation before the second coming of Christ. And then you've got, that. This is a slide. Let me get away from this slide. I want to just show you so here's the inch for the year idea right here. Let's come down here. So this is an example of one of these books. I took this from, I think, Basil Stewart's book, but here's the same internal passage we're looking at. So he says that if you extended the side of the pyramid down into the ground, that would be 4,000 BC. And then, that would be all the way up to the top would be like 6,000 years. So they believe in a 6,000 year creation. But here you've got these points. He's got 1486 for the Exodus, and he's got which is roughly, different people say different times. That's roughly the time frame. Then in here you've got Jesus was born, and if you take the number of inches again, it comes to roughly the time that Jesus was born and crucified, etc. And so.
Larry, could you also just, in terms of that particular length, could you talk about the end of the age of Taurus, the end of the age of Pisces?
Well, it's interesting that let me just show this, and then I'll do that because maybe I can do that here. So this is a close-up of that junction. There's the well shaft going down, the Queen's Chamber going across, the Grand Gallery at the top, and the first ascending passage. So if you take that point to be the birth of Christ, so it's 33.5 inches up to the junction point, and Jesus was 33 and a half when he was crucified. That's the beginning of the Grand Gallery there. And so that would take him to the time of his death on the cross. And then if you go across 30 inches and then take an arc from there, that comes to the time of his baptism. So this is what they say. So Jesus is he presents a sacrifice to the human race. So you're asking me about these ages. Well, the ages that preceded Pisces, and of course the fish was used as a symbol of Christianity, and that's the age of Pisces, the 2,000 years of the Christian prominence throughout the world. But the two ages that preceded it were both sacrificial animals. You've got Taurus and you've got Aries, and both the ram and the bull are sacrificial animals. So it's like it's like you got the sacrifices, and then you've got the 2,000 years of the prominence of Christianity around the world, and then we're moving into the age of Aquarius, and so that would be the pouring out of the Spirit and the new age that's coming and all that kind of thing. So
yeah.
So it's just the point is that's how it's sort of full circle. And so I do think that probably chronologically I'm also looking at study on the Giza plateau and for looking for different time indicators there. But just within the pyramid itself, if you take that idea and those books that I have, each one of the expositors give different years, because there's debates about, was Jesus born in 4 BC, 2 BC? Was he crucified in 33 AD, 31 AD? So just like there's debates among chronologists, debates in the academic world about all kinds of dates of things in history, the same thing happens. But the idea that it could be embedded there, I think, is likely. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
especially when. And this might seem ludicrous to some, but when you mentioned that the unit that you're using is the inch, because Elsewhere, the inch has been associated with the day in terms of linear measure symbolizing time. For example, Richard and Robin Heath have found that at Karnak. And so that's an interesting connection.
Yeah, and I do think that there could be a connection because, Jesus said in one place, which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit to his own stature? And the Greek word there for stature really means to the length of your life, your lifespan. Right. Which of you can add a cubit, which is a measure of length, to a time period, your life? You're 60 years old, 50 years old. That's not a 1 meter, 1 foot, 1 inch. That's a time length. And so here, while Jesus is really teaching about the futility of worry, which of you by taking thought can add a cubit? Worry is futile. That's the main teaching. But hidden within that teaching is which of you by taking thought can add, a cubit, which is a length, to your stature. And so there's the blending of time and space, the Einsteinian idea that time and space are connected. And so the idea of inch for a year, inch for a month, inch for a day, sure, it could be,
or foot for a month, yes. It depends on the scale that you're using, obviously, but it's interesting that the inch does work like that in other sites. And I think from looking at the dimensions of the Great Pyramid and the other 2 main pyramids, that the inch does work as an indicator of time in terms of days. But that's just one theory. But it's interesting that you found that. And you found a really interesting theory also with some of the internal passages connected to the speed of light.
Yes. Let me see if I can show that here again. That's because I like to be visual. Yes, I could talk and say it, but let me see if I can find it here in the I think I've got that somewhere right here. Let me look at it.
Yeah, sure. Take your time.
I think it's in. Let's try this one. Okay, right here.
You have so many presentations, Larry, and you've been to Egypt how many times? It must be loads of times.
Well, in this September, I'll be leading my 20th tour. So, you can see this. So this is the book it's on Amazon. If you do a search for The Speed of Light in the Great Pyramid, or search for my name, you'll find this book on Amazon.
Yeah.
So here's the idea. And this idea came, like, how would you find the speed of light in these passage lengths? Well, my friend Bob Criley, who's an engineer, he had a dream that the passages in the Great Pyramid revealed the speed of light. So that's where the germ of the idea came from. I just started looking at all the lengths of the various passages. So here's what I found. So, if you start at the bottom, there's a 29-meter length down there. And then if you go the full
meters
length,
now.
I mean meters, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So you go the full length of the descending passage. I just used Flinders-Petrie's measurements, and it's 97 meters. And then and the whole book's about this. So, I get into the fine-tuned details. Basically, you got 92 meters if you go from the first ascending passage through the Grand Gallery, through the antechamber, and into the King's Chamber. It's 92 meters.
Yeah.
Then you've got 45 meters across the Queen's Chamber. Now, really, it's 44 meters across there. But the well shaft, which comes up about 1 meter to the west of the beginning of that passage. So you have to add a meter to the 44 meters. And so you got 45. And then if you look at the King's Chamber, from the entrance into the King's Chamber to the sarcophagus is 8 meters. So put those up above. You got 29, 97, 92, 45, and 8, basically starting from the bottom of the pyramid using all the major passage systems. And of course, the speed of light in a vacuum is 299,792,458 meters per second. And so that, and I actually submitted this to Archaeological Discovery, the scientific journal. And I didn't think, I had any chance of being published. But then I had second thought, why not? Why wouldn't they publish it? Science is built on measurement. All I did was take the best measures of these passages in the Great Pyramid. I didn't make any esoteric claims about what it means or what the Egyptians knew. I simply said, isn't it interesting that these passages come out to the numbers in the speed of light?
Yeah.
And so there it is.
Yeah, it is. There it is. I mean, again, you could query the use of the meter in the pyramid. I personally think it's a valid unit at Giza, but I know I'm in the minority. But that to me is very interesting because
Well,
you've
let
got
me just show. Let me
and they
since you
work.
said that. Let me share two things about that. Just they're very simple, but I have to go to the entire screen here. Come over here, and then I'll go to that same because I think I put it in here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, here we go. Meter in the King's Chamber. All right, so here's a floor plan of the King's Chamber. It's a double square, so it's 10 cubits by 20 cubits. Okay, very regular numbers. And of course, therefore, if you do a perimeter, you're going to get 60 cubits. Okay, well, that 60 cubits is 10 pi meters. So I'm suggesting that they knew pi and they knew the meter. Now, again, you could say
I'm with you there. Yeah.
there's one way you could see the meter there. So I'm suggesting that says to me they knew pi and the meter. But let's look at the wall. So if we're at the floor, this is either the north or south wall. So we already know that the width of that wall is 20 cubits. And so, well, since it was 10 cubits on the floor, yeah, maybe they'll make the ceiling an even, 15 cubits. We got 10 cubits, 20 cubits. Oh, but no, look at this. It's 11.18 cubits. So why would you use that? Number one reason is using that, you get exactly 12 meters in the diagonal. So again, it's not a proof, but it's like, yeah, it could be.
The more of these connections you find, the more that they build a picture that you can take seriously. If it was just the one, it'd be interesting.
So here's a connection to inches. So because I was talking to the class about the meter and the British system. So inches, which we were just talking about. Okay, so you got the moon's radius there, and of course, you got the different measurements in the Great Pyramid there. So here's a plan view, a top view of the Great Pyramid. And so that's right there. It's there. There's the bottom of it. So that line right there drawn through the middle would be the top view of that, of the apothem there, basically. And then the diagonal would basically be these Eris edges right there, if you're looking at a top view. Okay, so that Eris edge right there is 8,629 inches. Okay, so if you divide that, take the speed of light in well, I've got their meters per second, but it's not meters per second. That's miles per hour. 186,000 miles per hour divided by that number, it equals the moon's radius. So our friend Dennis is the one that came up with this. So that's just interesting.
If anyone doesn't know, found so many connections at Giza in terms of light and the moon and all sorts of other things.
Right, that's right. And then just another interesting thing. So if you take the apothem on one side, it's 7,342 inches. And then if you take the other Eris edge over there, it's 8629 in terms of inches. And if you multiply those, it comes to 63,360,000 inches, which is exactly 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
So in other words, that's just, an interesting thing. We got miles, you got inches, and so there you go.
Which would suggest that we're still using a very similar system of measure.
That's right, that there's a connection there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, if you take the Great Pyramid and put it so it was laid out on the earth so that the base of the Great Pyramid was the equator, then the top where if you put the moon on top of where the earth is, the center of the moon would be the top of the Great Pyramids. And since many people have said the Great Pyramid is a miniature of planet Earth, it's a 43,200th miniature of planet Earth. It's also showing there's a connection with the moon there. Okay, so
yeah, that's pretty amazing. So the moon comes back again and again in your work and Dennis's work. I found it, and I know a lot of people have found connections to the moon at Giza. So that's so interesting to see that like that.
Here's one reason why. This is the thing that just fascinated me as I learned this. So if you take the meter, which was supposedly an invention of the enlightened French and the Enlightenment, and then proportionally, that's what the length of cubit would be, and that's from the Egyptians, so it's not unrelated to the French society. And then you take the foot, which is from the British foot or whatever, so it's a different civilization. So these would all be not connected in any way. But isn't it interesting that a meter plus a cubit is exactly 5 feet? I mean, that just is incredible. So you got the full 6 feet if you add the foot. The meter plus cubit plus the foot is 6 inches. So it seems like there's a connection. And then you could make a case that if you take the cubit and the foot, you've got the megalithic yard. And
yeah,
so
I think that Howard Crowhurst find that that's a really good connection.
Yeah, so I just tell people I think there's an aboriginal connection. And then the whole idea of you take a 1 meter pendulum and swing it, in a 30-degree arc that it swings out. So if there's your 1 meter pendulum, and then there's a 30-degree swing, then that arc right there is exactly 1 cubit. So there's a connection between, a meter and cubit. So I think it's an ontological aboriginal connection. And so right there, I put all ancient measuring systems are connected by integral fractions. Melissa, that just floored me. I actually read that. Let me just put it on the screen here. That was in this book right here. All Done with Mirrors by John Neal. John Neal, a great metrologist, and he talks in there about how it was a discovery of the metrologists. And I was flipping out, when he said it. It's like a major discovery that all ancient systems of measure are connected. And I've seen Harry Sievertson do this too. So, the common fractions are 24/25 or 175/176. But in these integral fractions, if you take the Babylonian, the Indian, the Chaldean, the meter, all these different measurements, they're all connected by these integral fractions. And so that to me, there's no other conclusion but that it leads back to Enoch. Because any effect has to have an adequate cause to explain it. Why do we have a 7-day week? It's used all around the world. To have such a massive effect, there must be a cause. And so to have this effect that all systems of measure are connected, and of course, Wikipedia doesn't say that. You didn't learn that in school, so you're probably doubting me. But John Neal says it was the discovery of the metrologist. So at least there are some sane people that are, students of metrology that say that. If it is true, there's only one explanation. There has to be an aboriginal beginning. And I think Enoch he's the original Thoth. He's the Hermes. Hermes and Thoth to me are legendary or mythical, but Enoch was a real person. And I think inch comes from Enoch. Anciently they didn't use vowels, so Enoch would be NCH, which is inch. So he was the father of metrology. So if you have an aboriginal beginning, humans putting systems together, but in harmony with the earth that was created by God, then because you can show that the cubit is a specific part of the earth. You can show the meter is the 1/10 millionth part of the quadrant from the pole to the equator through Paris. And so you can show that these ancient measures are connected to the size of the earth and that they're all connected. So again, that was just amazing to me when I learned that. And I understand most people don't believe that or they've never been taught that. But to me, if all ancient systems of measure are connected, there's got to be a reason.
I would agree with you that they're derived from the size of the earth and a measuring system that was designed to divide up the earth into ways that were sympathetic to the important numbers, whether they were cycles of time or whether they were the important numbers like 4,320, 108, etc. So I would definitely agree with that. But it's interesting to hear you connect that to Enoch because, well, in some ways, you could say it goes back much, much further in time. It's very difficult to prove that, but it's possible that you could, go back much, much further. So Enoch is the great-grandfather of Noah, I think. So where does that place him on the timeline?
Yeah, well, he's the seventh, called the seventh from Adam in Jude, and
seventh from Adam.
And so and I think that because you could say it goes much back further, but not if you believe that the creation story. So if Adam was created, and then his seventh from Adam is Enoch, then you're talking about the aboriginal part of the human race. So I am a creationist. I just think evolution's impossible, and so it makes sense to me. And to me, everything that the mysteries on earth can all be explained within a time frame like that. I don't. There's nothing to me. Everything properly understood, I think. But take where did all these? Okay, so we found all these connections. The megaliths. Howard Crowhurst has shown all the connections between the megaliths. in England, the sacred geometry that's there, the unbelievable connections. I found the speed of light in, the places when I was studying the megaliths there. And so where did that come from? And all around the world, we see that these megaliths reveal the speed of light. They reveal sacred geometry, square root of 2, square root of 3, phi, pi, the Euler number. Where did that come from? Well, in the biblical framework, between the flood and the Tower of Babel, there was only one language spoken. And so there could have been and so that's when there would have been a single, agreed upon science, because, well, for instance, you and I would say that the speed of light is 186,000, miles per second, or 209 million, meters per second. Well, how do we know? You've never measured it, Melissa. I've never measured it, and yet we say it with such authority. Well, how do we know that's the link?
Yes,
The point is we can learn. We're believing the people from Einstein who gave us that, and it's in Wikipedia now. So we just accept. So that's all I'm saying that they had. So all these people that put the speed of light into the Great Pyramid, or that put, the golden ratio into a temple or whatever, they didn't have to discover it. There was a received, those numbers you were talking about are called canonical numbers sometimes. So there was a received canon that if maybe one person initially got, but the point is it could be passed down. So I think that the special knowledge that Enoch had, I mean, this whole idea of, Rosicrucians, Illuminati, the Masons, these groups that carried down these secrets. That's all we're talking about here. That there was this aboriginal knowledge that was given to Enoch through revelation with God. He passed it down, and it ultimately went to Seth, and then to Enoch, and went to Noah. And so after the flood, if Noah had this, then there could have been a very quick rise to the technology that was probably in the Tower of Babel, very advanced technology. And then the Tower of Babel fell. And even Noam Chomsky says that the story of the Tower of Babel is the best explanation for the origin of languages. And Noam Chomsky doesn't believe the story of the Tower of Babel. He simply said it's the best explanation for the origin of languages. So that there's a great mystery there that's solved by, if you believe in the Tower of Babel. But then from the Tower of Babel, if you take that to be the aboriginal beginnings of the human race back to the caveman times, then it's taken thousands of years to get from there to coal, oil, water power, the Industrial Revolution. It took thousands and thousands of years to get from the horse and buggy to computers and steel and the stuff we have today. So why did it take thousands of years there? But between the flood and the Tower of Babel, it happened quickly. I think because they had the revelation of advanced science and knowledge. And so if that's passed on quickly, but then if you have a proliferation of languages and cultures, it's harder to communicate, especially in an era where there's no internet, there's no, railroads, there's no jets. And so, the advance in technology was much slower. So I think that the evidence of these secrets that are in megaliths all around the world, it can be explained by the fact there was a period of time, according to the biblical history, where there was one language spoken and probably a tremendous amount of knowledge that was taken over from the flood, which was lost in the amnesia of the human race at the Tower of Babel. So,
that's an interesting point. And if you're to believe, to take Plato's point of view, for example, he says that knowledge is remembered. So it's possible then that this knowledge could be somehow acquired in a short space of time. And personally, I prefer to look back slightly further back in time in terms of human progress. And I think we can agree that it's never entirely sort of on an upwards track. It dips, and a little bit there are peaks and troughs in terms of human progress. But it's a really interesting thought, and that idea of there once being a single language, that would actually, I mean, you can take it literally, you can take it as a metaphor, you can take it at a different time and place, but it's an interesting idea, especially when you think that there are so many common themes in the myths, in the units of measure, and all sorts of other human cultural artifacts, if you like, that have survived to our present day, all over the world, actually.
Yeah.
How do you think we should reinterpret the world around Enoch in the light of all these things? So, for example, going back to Babylon, maybe, and that world, so the Tower of Babel. These are very important then in that case, if we're going to try and understand the whole mystery.
I'm not sure I understand your question here.
So basically, we need to look at the pyramids of Giza, as you've done, but we also maybe need to go back to Babylon, the Tower of Babel, and think about what this universal language might have been.
Yeah, well, I think that the way that there's a unity in the things we find from megaliths, like Howard Crowhurst came and looked at in Newark in Ohio, and found things there, the same things that you find in Egypt, same things that you find in the UK, and so that in a way that different languages don't, because when you study ancient cultures, there's different pottery, there's different scripts, there's different language, and so that's why we always think in terms of regions. It evolved over here, it evolved over there, but when you look at the megaliths, it's a different story. There's like a common set of revelation. It is a more common language, and that would seem to fit a time when there was a maybe a more robust and a universal form of transmission of knowledge and stuff. So it seems like either they were like the Phoenicians, where they could travel with ease around the world, and they just spread this knowledge and built these megaliths or passed the knowledge on. But it seems like it's a widespread language, the same way that we could say, well, there's we see Proto-Indian languages here, we see Chinese languages over here. Those tend to be very regional. Languages tend to be very regional, but megaliths, no. It tends to be, there's this worldwide language, because it is a language. I mean, it's the language of numbers. So
language of number, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, but the people that built those, though, probably had to have a language of speaking, and for some reason that's great. If they were these advanced, Atlantean, brilliant, Da Vinci's of their age, why didn't they leave us like a little crystal chip that we could now, put under a microscope and we'd see all this knowledge? If they were that advanced, why did they use megaliths? I mean, this is like caveman or something, big, strong men moving megaliths, but that's what they left. And so it's like they chose a simple means, and yet those simple means reveal very complex maths. So they were not, aboriginally stupid or something. They were very advanced in their understanding, but they didn't leave us computers. They didn't leave us, chips or something, which it seems to me they could have if they were that advanced.
Well, maybe we need to look at the megaliths as kinds of computers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just the way Stonehenge, they talked about being a lunar computer and stuff. Sure. So yeah, well, if we do that, then yes. But the point is that we always associate advanced technology with the inventions we have, with automobiles, with planes, with cutting edge cybernetics and stuff. So to me, there's a form of humility that's expressed in choosing to leave these profound mathematical understandings in stone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's going to be left of our cultural output in 5,000 years?
But here's the difference in what your rhetorical question says. Here's where that's different than the megalith. They obviously chose to embed their secrets in those monuments. If we fall apart, there's no conscious embedding in the Empire State Building. There's no conscious embedding in the layout of New York City. I don't think so. So the point is,
maybe New York, yes, but that's an interesting layout. Especially
we'll be able to discover a lot of things if this civilization collapses from all the scraps, but not because it was embedded there by choice by the people that designed those cities. The thing that's the thing, that the ancient cities, there was this connect, the ancient world that John Michel talks about, this Eden from the past or whatever, this Camelot from the past, where there was this, understanding that you're part of the cosmos and you fit in. And so you design your hut. Obviously, you're going to connect the size of the earth to it, and you're going to put the summer solstice in it and everything. We build buildings today, but there's not a thought of that. There's not 1 inch of thought. The Sears Tower was the tallest building in Chicago and in the world for a while when I lived in Chicago. I'll bet in all the million, well, not millions, thousands of pounds of paper that were the blueprints for that, there probably wasn't one thought to build phi or pi in there in that whole building. So the point is, we've got, the modern structures, we're not in that same sense of showing that you're part of the cosmos that you're in. You show your understanding of the connection. It's almost like I'm building a bigger building than you. It's just the old-fashioned pride, and there's no humility like I see the ancient megalithic builders of saying we were content, because we want, even Dennis, one time I copied something he didn't get credit. He was totally mad. It's like copyright. It's like, I discovered that, that's what we do as humans. So we say that, and yet there's none of that. It's like there's no name written there about I'm John Doe and I'm the one that discovered this. They're simply showing us the speed of light is in the Great Pyramid. We put it there. Okay.
Yeah.
But we're not bragging
I
or
do
anything.
think there's probably a little bit of that going on now. And especially when it's not something built for commercial purposes, especially if you look at dimensions around about, say, the city of Washington or Paris.
Yeah, okay, that's true. And I've done programs about that.
But that's the exception,
yes,
I'd say.
Yes, you're right.
Most people are right. There's no sense of,
the Vatican has it. Washington, D.C. has it. Yes, I agree. And you can find, this is a thing that I think you showed me one time, Jim
Allison?
Jim Allison does that thing where he shows that Philadelphia, New York, there's an ancient, before Washington D.C. was there was something. Before New York City was there was something, because Jim shows that that there's some. So there is but that's going in the other direction though. That's saying that the people from the past put that there. We just built on top of it, and but there was, I agree, some conscious embedding in the layout of Washington D.C. and the Vatican and maybe some other places, but most places, no. I'd say most places that's probably not true.
Having said that, you're right that we do have a tendency to build on older sites. So we're probably still replicating the structures, up to a degree, especially the locations of cities and sacred places and that kind of thing. So that probably there's been something on, say, where London is for thousands of years. We know about the Romans, but we don't generally, and to be fair, there aren't that many finds from before the Romans, and the theory that London is a little older than that is a little sketchy and a little bit tentative, but possibly it's been there for thousands of years. Maybe there was a megalithic structure there. We don't know. Right. So that's an interesting thought as well. Yeah. But going back to the pyramids, what do you think is the biggest, the most important message that you've managed to get from the pyramids? What do you think is the most important thing that you've learned from the pyramids?
Well, I think it's what I said. It's because I've sort of come to this, on my own. I remember when I led a tour to Stonehenge. I'd never done that before. I always led tours to Egypt, but I found so many connections between the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge that I decided to, take a risk, do an experiment, and lead a tour to Stonehenge. Right, and of course, David Kenworthy, helped me out. And that was wonderful, and it was a very successful trip because I had us live in a big Airbnb, so we were all close to each other, the group. And I said that ahead of time, so anybody that didn't like the idea of close quarters with the people you're touring with, they didn't sign on. So the people that did it was a great spirit and stuff like that. One of the first talk that I gave to them in that Airbnb, I just found it coming out. I hadn't really thought it through before, but it's what I said to you several times. It's the humility of the people that embedded those things there, because, in the Great Pyramid, there's no hieroglyphics, there's no gold, there's no silver, there's no, I'm the king and I built this, look at me, So there's this tremendous reserve, because no one doubts the revelation. Well, the people that study, John Michel, that book that I traveled 4 hours to get on Super Bowl Sunday,
I remember you did that. You literally drove 4 hours, didn't you?
Ancient metrology. And again, in the Dewey Decimal System at the Father Hesburgh Library at the University of Notre Dame, it wasn't listed because it's basically, ancient metrology by John Michel is a history of measurement. Mm-hmm. And it was listed under some esoteric subject. In other words, in the call system in the library, it wasn't like science or the history of measure. It was like spirituality. And so, that's kind of crazy. But he says in there that, you know, that's the world is embedded in Stonehenge, the dimensions of the earth, the thing that we thought only the, you know, the Greeks knew. Well, from before that, it's embedded in Stonehenge. And so I think that was the subtitle. It was Ancient Metrology, or something like the knowledge of the world embedded in the measurements of Stonehenge. That was like the subtitle. And so that's probably the biggest single thing is that there's a humility that so part of this intelligence they had, you know, to build in the sacred geometry into these structures. And so we think of someone very intelligent, is that it was based in humility. So it says, you know, make sure you contain your intelligence within humility and avoid pride. So that's probably the single, you know, message that has come to me, is just that there's a great reserve in these sages that left these embedded.
I think that's a really interesting thing about the pyramids. And for me, I would connect that to a sense that we are part of just one part of the universe, and then the universe is within us. You know, there's a kind of sense of we're just one small part of a very, very large world. And that's kind of reflecting that. But you know, another thing that you've talked about.
I can just comment on that. See, so you just expressed something that's what I said these ancients said, because other people have said what you just said, but not everybody says it. In other words, you can, you know, it takes a certain, you know, attitude to be able to see that the cosmos is that big, and yet we're, you know, some people are prideful still and whatever, but you expressed a humble humility in looking at, and I think that's what they did. And so that's you're modeling what I think they told us to do, you know, because, you know, there's terrible stuff that's going on, the terrible stuff that's going on in the Middle East, the idea that people could be dropping bombs on each other, you know, Iran, Israel, the US, it's terrible. And partly if there's a lack of that humility there, to think that dropping a bomb on a huge portion of humanity is ever a righteous thing to do or the best thing to do is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So I just think that, you know, if there was that attitude among those players, they'd find a resolution for an amicable solution.
Possibly that would be, I mean, that is a very whimsical thought for me, but I would love to think that there was a time when people treated each other with respect across the board, you know, knowing that each person, each animal was just one part of the universe, and that all of our actions, collective and individual, had an effect on the whole thing, you know. That would be a very nice thought.
And I'm not saying that everyone did it, although that's the implication of an Eden, of a you know, of a Camelot, that's of an Atlantis. That's kind of the implication. There was this idyllic thing, but, you know, whether or not there was, and I do think that the Garden of Eden was, you know, real and perfect at one time. So I think all these other stories are maybe reflections of that. But I'm not saying that every, you know, ancient person had this. I'm saying that you asked me what I had concluded from those that ended up leaving these measurements in pyramids and stuff had this humility. So even if everyone didn't, it's saying we should. It would be best if you can follow our example, that use your intelligence. As a matter of fact, you know, there's a guy who I met his wife at a conference, and he was 40 years working for Raytheon, or this company in Egypt, and so he'd been in the pyramids many, many times back before, you know, it was controlled the way it is now. And he did a bunch of studies of the blocks in the King's Chamber, and she gave me a bunch of his old papers and stuff. He never wrote the book he wanted to write, but one of the things that he absolutely believed that was in the messages in the blocks of the King's Chamber was that nuclear fission was dangerous, and the byproducts of nuclear waste would be very harmful to the human race, that we needed to develop nuclear fusion. That's what he believed the blocks in the King's Chamber said. And so, you know, that's the kind of that would fit what I'm saying here, that they're saying, yes, we've got all this intelligence and we're capable of doing Da Vinci, Einsteinian kind of things. You've seen what we've done here, but we're saying hold it with the humility that we are displaying. But they don't even say it that baldly. I'm concluding that after studying it and realizing it, because if you're really humble, you don't say, hey, look how humble I am. You don't do that, and they didn't do that. It's just that they were humble, and if you see it, then you see it, and that's what I'm saying, that they held their knowledge with a humility, and that's that's something that we don't have en masse today.
Something we could learn from.
Yes.
And another thing that's very interesting is the way that we can make a connection between something that's hard data, basically the measurements, the proportions, and then some more esoteric ideas and these ideas, sort of ethical ideas that we're talking about, that we're connecting these two things from looking at the proportions, the measurements, and also, as you said, the style, the lack of build and statues and
let me tell you an unusual. Let me show you an unusual way. Let's see. I'm gonna go visual. I'm trying to think of where I have it. It's okay. I think I know where. Let me show you one of my discoveries that kind of works in that direction. So I'm gonna go share the entire screen. Okay, go there, and then it's gonna be. I think it's in this one somewhere. Let's come down here. Yeah, okay, right here. Let's look at this one. Okay, so in the class that I was teaching, I talked about my book, The Speed of Light in the Great Pyramid. I talked about my book, The Song of the Sphinx, and then this is a book that I wrote called Enoch, Egyptian New Orion Connection Hypothesis. So it's really just
Orion. I was going to ask you about Orion.
Yeah, so it's Egyptian because Orion appears on Earth in many places. The Hopi Indians did it in Arizona. It's in China. I found it in the Orkney Islands in Scotland. It's in Mexico. There's a lot of places where Orion. So I'm talking about the Egyptian, and it's the new Orion because Robert Pahl did the Orion correlation theory, and this is I'm showing there's a more complete fulfillment, and so I don't call it the Orion correlation theory. I call it the connection hypothesis because it gives me the name Enoch. But here's what I learned. So this book is about how I went to all the places in Egypt where the stars from the constellation Orion land. I had my artist draw the picture. You can see that's on the book. You can see that there are lines from the stars that are in Orion down to various places in Egypt. And I'm saying that I was finding out the way that Orion should be laid down in Egypt. And so so what I did is once I calculated where those places were, I put them on my watch, my Garmin Instinct watch, and then I could use my watch to go to those GPS places. So I was out in the Egyptian desert, and I would simply follow the GPS coordinates that were on my watch, telling me turn left here, go around this mountain, go here, so that I could find them. And what I found in doing that, so I thought this research was just going to be, archaeoastronomy. There's a star above and there's a pyramid down below. But that's not exactly what I found. I did find in many places that there were pyramids where the stars of Orion said they should be placed. But okay, so the Orion correlation theory is that the three belt stars of Orion correspond with the three Giza pyramids. Yeah. That's the Orion correlation. Mine is new because that's all Pahl did. Okay?
That's right. And that was already controversial enough, to be fair.
Yeah, that's right. And
right, even didn't expand.
The book that he wrote with Dr. Robert Schoch about the Sphinx in 2017, Pahl has an appendix, and he's still arguing for people to more widely accept his Orion correlation theory. And scientists, why don't you please accept this? So he's still arguing for it, but that's all he's got. He's got the connection of three stars and three pyramids. So I wanted to go, that's a belt theory. I wanted to go to all of Orion. So that's what I set out to do. What about the stars, the other stars? What about the stars in the lion skin? He's holding a lion skin. Where are those stars on Egypt's soil? Right there. Okay. What about the Orion Nebula? Okay, this beautiful place where stars are being created. What about Rigel, the foot? And so that's what I did. I went to those places, and what I found, it's as above, so below. So I talk about. Let me jump through this because I was showing how I found Sirius. I looked for the star Sirius on Egyptian soil, and when I found it was a confirmation for the method I had used to try and find, like, you know what, I guess I don't have it more specific than this. So let me just show this again. So here's what I found. This is what I was jumping off from what you said there, Melissa.
Yeah.
What I was led to was to realize this revelation was a sociological revelation. It was about, because what I found, for instance, where the lion skin came. Now the lion skin, Orion is holding a lion skin. He's saying, look what I killed. A lion is an enemy. You know, when there's a lion loose in an African village, the mother's all worried their kids are going to get eaten. And when someone kills the lion, that's the enemy. The enemy's been defeated. That's what Orion has. So the lion skin represents the enemy. What did I find on Egyptian soil that's the enemy? Well, those stars come down to a district in Egypt that's called October 6th, the 6th of October. Mm-hmm. One time my wife and I were at the Mina House bar, and my wife asked the bartender where she was from, and she said 6th of October. And my wife said, well, I didn't ask you when you were born. I asked you where you live. I said, honey, I said 6th of October is the name of a district. How did it get that name? Well, first of all, the 6th of October was built in the desert. There was nothing there. They started building schools and apartments, and it just was built from the ground up. There was no organic connections from the past. I stayed there for a while with an Egyptologist who invited me to stay. I had made arrangements to stay in Giza, right near the pyramids where the camel owners live and the horse owners and stuff. But since he invited me, I thought, well, it's a chance to rub shoulders with a famous Egyptologist. So I'll go live with him. And he was in 6th of October, and I hated it. All the doors were locked. There was fear. There was none of the organic connections you feel on the streets where you've got vendors and people know each other, and there's, centuries of family traditions and stuff. And so when Egyptians build today, the El Sisi, the president's doing these massive building programs, they never plan for green space. There are no parks for mothers to walk their babies. There are no soccer fields. And so this October 6th, that's an enemy of mankind, this urban living without giving people a connection to the earth, and militarism. Because how did October 6th get that name? Because that was the day that Syria and Egypt agreed to go to war against Israel. And even though they lost that war, according to Wikipedia, they still, because they hate the Jews and because, they want to fight. And so those are great enemies of mankind. So that's where the stars of the lion skin came down, in an area that's connected to militarism and urban living without a thought of giving people some green space. So I began, and just one other connection. So where did the Orion Nebula come down? Because the Orion Nebula is known to be one of the most beautiful parts of the sky, and scientists say that stars are being created there. It came down. Now here's Cairo, one of the largest cities in the world, a sprawling urban mess, and it came right down in a very huge organic farm. And so I went there when I followed the GPS there for the first time to find out where on Egyptian soil the Orion Nebula is. There was bees, there were butterflies, there were farmers offering me tea. There was this wonderful smell. There was food being grown. What do we live on? We live on food. If our food is degerminated and, just processed to death, it's got no life in it. So the Orion Nebula, where stars are being created on Earth, was connected to an organic farm where farming methods that have been used for thousands of years in Egypt are used. So what I found in this book, and it's written like a travelogue, is really about the sociology of how to live.
I see what you mean now about sociology. So I was expecting you to say, I found this ancient site and this ancient site corresponding to these stars.
I left off those because I did find some of them. Like, for instance,
I know you found some.
Betelgeuse and Rigel, which are two major stars. You got the shoulder star and you got the foot star. Those are the pyramid of Zawiat al-Arian and the Geodetic Pyramid, these two huge pits that were observatories probably. They were known to be observatories. I think the Geodetic was called the Geodetic Starry Sky, and the Pyramid of Zawiat al-Arian also had a name connected to heaven. And so, there's a debate about whether there ever were pyramids there. There certainly were deep pits in both of those. And those two are anchor points, and both those are the two brightest stars in Orion. They vie between, sometimes Betelgeuse is more brighter and sometimes Rigel is. It's fascinating to study about the changing brightness of Rigel and Betelgeuse. And so that was a connection I found. That's the kind you just were talking about. That's the kind of connection between a megalithic structure and the stars. But the other part to me was more fascinating, because there weren't pyramids there, although a friend of mine said if you dug down 40 meters, there will be pyramids there. But I didn't have the money for that or the permission to excavate, but I knew what I found there. And there's even more than what I'm saying here, but it was a profound revelation.
So,
and again,
would you think then those connections that you found, that they would add to the credibility of the Orion correlation theory then? And you're happy that that works and that you found, oh, and also Ian Douglas has found some connections, hasn't he? Are they similar? Are they the same? I don't actually know.
No, he's dealing with a different era. But so, yeah, you're right to ask that question, because, I understand that really what I just said here, people would say, well, you're crazy because you're saying that this taking Orion and laying Orion down on Egyptian soil, which is what the Orion correlation theory is. And Baval never went beyond the belt stars and the 3 Giza pyramids because he couldn't find it. I know he was looking on the wrong side.
He was looking, was he?
He absolutely. You think he would, of course, because it's not the Orion correlation theory, it's the belt theory. If someone says, well, how did the talk go with Melissa? I don't know. I kept looking at her belt. Her belt was really cool. Like, no one is known by their belt, and except for a heavyweight champion, maybe, but the boxing champion. But but the thing is that, and so Baval has argued even as recently as the book with the Sphinx, saying people should notice. He wants recognition. Baval always wanted recognition. He's got a huge recognition from just his following, the Graham Hancock fan base.
Yeah.
But that wasn't enough, But I'm saying, I'm not trying to get any recognition, because I know no one's ever going to recognize it. I'm like a Lone Ranger, and the book's a travelogue, because I had to present it as a travelogue. But what I'm saying is that there is a providence that's so. How does that just happen to be so? In other words, when I took plotting, using the plotting method I used, taking the stars of the lion skin and placing them down in the earth. Well, what if it would have come on, the downtown of Cairo, where the major businesses and banks are? Well, that I wouldn't see a connection there. But where it did, the same thing is true with the club. What does the club stand for? Plainly, the club stands for judgment. Why is Orion? There a fascination with Orion with all ancient cultures. There is this universal fascination with the constellation Orion. And it's partly because they were all worried about judgments. That's one of the reasons that the things about Enoch said that there would be revelations of catastrophes to come, because the ancient world was bothered by catastrophes and wanted to warn future generations about them. And so there was some way to, if there's some way to embed that or chronicle that. So I'm saying there was some kind of foreknowledge there. I mean, why is there a connection? You can see if there's a connection with a star and a pyramid. They placed a pyramid here because there's a star there. But they didn't place that organic farm there because of that. They didn't place, where the club star is. I found devastation in the desert. It was unbelievable. Normally you walk in the desert, you don't see a massive pit of devastation. You see sand, you see sand dunes, you see cliffs, you see mountains. There was, like, the Egyptian government has secretly, every society has trouble with getting rid of its garbage. It's a universal problem. Where do you put the garbage? People throw garbage out every week, and in very wealthy communities, that garbage is regularly picked up. In poor areas, it's not, but in rich areas, it is. And then there's the problem of where to put it. And I know that the Egyptian government has partly solved that problem by building huge pits out in the desert and burying it there. They don't want to tell anybody they do that. And I used to get chased away when I was out there, like, with binoculars checking it out. But where the club stars, the club, I'm going to hit you. This is judgment. There's judgment coming on the human race. Boom. Massive pits of buried, so what was there? Broken doll arms, chairs, half burned thing. It was a massive, like you were just there and an atomic bomb had struck. Now, how could that be? How could the place that the club stars in Orion's club on Egyptian soil come down to a place that's like a devastated earth. So I'm simply saying, you figure out how those coincidences took place. I'm simply saying they were there, they are there, and that became the message of the book to me.
It's an interesting idea, really interesting. So you got the sense of the spirit of the place, and it's responding to the star connection above.
Yeah, which is a geographic connection, which is simply a geometric connection. In other words, the Hopi Indians, every Hopi site in Arizona is placed where there's a star in Orion. So the entire, all the Hopi settlements, and they laid down Orion in a much bigger area. Arizona is much bigger than the little part of Egypt where, so you can, and Egypt,
on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, you can bring Orion down to Earth any scale you want to. There's no right or wrong. If I draw a picture of Orion, the constellation Orion on my desk, I just brought Orion down to Earth. Here he is right here on my paper, and it's at the scale of 1 to a billion. And so the Hopi Indians did it on a massive scale. Arizona is much bigger than Egypt, so they laid Orion down big. I found Orion, but I had to follow principles. Like, in other words, you can't just say this. How do you know that's Rigel? Because if you take the orientation of the stars of Orion and lay it down, you can make it bigger or smaller and lay it down. So in other words, I didn't make these things up. I followed an overlay.
Yeah. And the fact that as you said, so the Hopi in Arizona have done something similar and elsewhere around the world. So in Ireland, where I am, Anthony Murphy's found what he's called the High Man, but he's basically mapped Orion onto some ancient sites, including Newgrange and other places. Rigel, I think, is a place in Drogheda. He's managed to do this map, and it's not completely perfect, but it's quite impressive. Hugh Evans has done something similar in Wales, in Gwynedd. He's got actually several constellations, but a different scale again. And I can't remember if Catherine Maltwood, she had a glaciary zodiac, we're talking a century ago, but I can't remember if she had Orion. She probably did. So
I found it up in the Orkneys, the Standing Stones of Stennis, the book, what's it called? I'm getting rusty, but the three major monuments are the three stars of Orion. It was the Standing Stones of Stennis, the Ring of Brodgar, and so I was looking at the other places. Then, if those are where the three stars are, then where are these other stars? And I was beginning to come up with things. I just didn't have time to follow through the way I did in Egypt. But I'm sure I could see the intimations that if I would have followed it through in the Orkneys, it's there too, in a similar way to where it is in Egypt, where there's a message where the star is, because there are, like the belt stars, there's the connection of the Ring of Brodgar and the Stones of Stennis. Those are real things. But there are other places where, just like I did in Egypt, there's not a megalith, but there's something connected to the meaning of that star. So it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. The ancient world, it seems to have, it's very different to our way of engaging with the world, but it seems to be so consistent across all these various places. This idea of connecting to the stars and the importance of the stars, and just really thinking about different constellations and asterisms. So let me ask you a question. Melissa, what do you attribute to the summer solstice, the fascination? It's continued today, like in the ceremony that is always done at Stonehenge. Besides the fact that it's the longest day of the year and possibly equal day and night, or besides those simple astronomical facts, what do you see as possibly significant about something like the solstice? Is there anything you see esoteric beyond just the simple, it's the longest day of the year, or what? You got any sense about that? Well, for me, it's all about the sun. Obviously it's about the sun, but it's about the symbolism of the sun. And that symbolism of the sun is definitely there in Christianity, and you're more of an expert than I am on Christianity, but it's there in the figure of Christ, of course, and the crucifixion, but it's also in the many other myths. And of course, the sun is one of the eyes of Horus, and many other deities around the world, they have one eye is the moon, one eye is the sun. But this idea of the sun as a deity, as a living being, and I think that that fascination never went away, even though it's not actually part of the Christian tradition to maybe look into that too much. Now, having said that, we have the feast day of John on the 24th Midsummer, which is, some people say, John the Baptist, the twin brother or the reciprocal to Jesus, who is in midwinter, the 24th of December. So that's an interesting connection as well, that we have this idea of Jesus Christ being born on the first day of the part of the year that the days start to get longer in, and then his twin or older brother or whatever is born supposedly on the day of the first day of the section when the days start to get progressively shorter. So that is incorporated in Christianity, not, I don't think, in the Bible, but that's an interesting way that we've inherited those ideas. And I think it's also just a way of connecting back to our ancestors, because we've lost all those oral traditions, at least in most of Europe and a lot of the States. I know you have also the indigenous tribes in the States who are brilliant at the oral traditions, and also in New Zealand, Australia, and other parts of the world, and Africa. But for many people like us, we've kind of lost that. So it's a way of somehow kind of abstractly connecting back to these ancestors. How do you feel about it?
Well, just that, for when I was far away from studying these things the way I do now, I used to think, well, big deal. Okay, so it's the summer solstice. Like, what's the big thrill? It's just simply an astronomical fact. As a matter of fact, I think it was somebody that John Michel or somebody said, there isn't really a solstice because there's no point at which, there's exactly half or something. It's just this concept. Yeah. It's almost like this concept.
Yeah.
And so, but yet there's all these ancient ceremonies. I just read today a little piece in the New York Times or somewhere they talked about 5 places. It just picked 5 places that have solar things. Stonehenge, obviously, but there's one that they do it down in Machu Picchu, and there's one, just places I hadn't heard about before. So there are these worldwide ceremonies and festivals and things associated with it. So there must be something, just there must be all this other legend and stuff tied to it for it to have such a widespread, effect. And so I just wonder if there was some message more that, because when there's so much hovering around something like that, there's got to be something to it, And
I think it's connected to this sense of cycles of time as well, isn't it? That sense of the year. I mean, there are different kinds of year. There's the year that we know, but then there's the great year, and then there's the lunar year. Yeah. And so that connects us to these other cycles on a much, much bigger scale as well. Just simply by remembering that the solstice has happened and the equinox has happened, we're connecting to the shorter cycles and then the longer cycles, 25,920 years. It's a way of connecting back to our ancestors on the one side, but it's also like time more generally. It's like that sense of these cycles are going to be so much bigger than us. So it's a connection to time. Well, listen, what I'd like to do, if you ever have me on again, I'd like to share some of my discoveries. I mean, I shared a little bit from the speed of light and the book, the Enoch book, but some, just to show, I think people might be interested to see some of the discoveries I made, because I've actually made presentations at major Egyptological conferences. Now I'm like a Graham Hancock or I'm an independent. I'm not an Egyptologist. I'm an independent researcher. I'm an alternative, what they call alternative. I'm not a guy that's in harmony with, the status quo and with Wikipedia and everything. I'm one of those guys. But, how I came to that, some of the discoveries I think people would find interesting, because I found them fascinating when I found them. That's why, I got into them. And so I think because today we're kind of speaking more philosophically at stuff in times, but if you see these specific revelations that I found as discoveries, it's like you realize it's really there. That it's really there, and then it makes you want to think, since I found these discoveries, it's like, and they're really real. Well, there's got to be more, and there's got maybe even a codified message that I haven't found yet, because I've just found a little piece here, a little piece here, a little piece here. But if people see them, I think they can really see, wow, wow, there really is something there. Because the guy that wrote the books about
Henry Lincoln about southern France, Mary Magdalene, all the sacred geometry that's in those
Yeah,
churches
yeah,
and stuff. He kept saying, and he was a BBC producer, and he kept saying in his books, he said other people would always write him and give him these big exoteric explanations, and he was always very, guarded about that. He just said, look at
yeah,
these amazing connections I found, and he always invited people to, go beyond me or see it, and I liked his attitude. And I
yeah.
think he really, ended his career. He died. I mean, when Google Earth was just starting to come to the fore, and I've often thought, man, I need to, because I'm leading a tour in 2026 to southern France, sort of following in Henry Lincoln's footsteps.
Oh, are you going to Carcassonne and then going to what's the name of the village with the
Rennes de Chateau?
Rennes Chateau? Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, I'm only doing because I've read the books a little bit. Because one of my tourists, she went with me to Stonehenge, and then she went with me to the Great Pyramid. She's the one that she actually toured years ago with Henry Lincoln, and she got me into it. And so I think that there's, he's got like an incubator that could lead to more stuff. I just haven't prepared for that trip yet by studying more fully his stuff. But the point I'm making is he always invited people, hey, this is what I've seen. What else do you see now? And I'm thinking if we, in a future program, I lay out specific revelations that I found, specific things where people see, because now you and me are just kind of talking and it's like, maybe. But when you really see, it's like you can really, and it's the way of inviting people in. Now that you see this, maybe you see some things we don't see, and what else
and
is
that
there?
place is very close to Lourdes as well. With the apparition of Mary. Now I know that Mary can appear wherever she likes it. Maybe there's no connection to landscape geometry and all this, but I think maybe there might be. So that will be an interesting connection as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to do it just because, obviously southern France is a nice, and really the reason I was going to do it this year, I was going to do the trip in 2025. But then one of my relatives is getting married in southern France at that time in 2026. So since I'm going to be over there anyway for that, I thought that'll give me more time to prepare. Then we'll do the tour too. So I've been looking at big Airbnbs there because I'd like the whole group. I'm thinking like 10 or 12 people or whatever, but be able to stay in the same house and just kind of live communally, with everybody having their own room, of course, and bathroom and everything, but still being able to be together. It works so well at Stonehenge. I'm using the same kind of model to use there.
So let's do that, and let's organize another session, and then we can talk about.
And then what I'll do is I'll give you like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 specific, and then we'll make sure that we just look at those things and share them, and then people can see the universe of things that. When I say I made a discovery, what are you talking about? I didn't find King Tut. Like we think of those as the discoveries. Howard Carter finds Tut's tomb, but my discoveries are related to largely measurement and megalithic stuff. But there's other things too, and I think the best way is for people to see it and then go, wow. Because that's what it's done for me,
A Google Earth screenshot speaks 1,000 words. So
that's right.
We'll have to do that. That sounds fascinating. Well, listen, let's leave it there for now. We've gone just over an hour, over an hour actually. So that was fantastic, Larry. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I look forward to
look at your work and where they can look at your videos and all sorts of things. Do you want to just explain?
Sure. On YouTube, I've got some YouTube. My handle, because YouTube is using handles now, is at the Great Pyramid. So just the at symbol and the Great Pyramid. So if you punch that into the search line on YouTube, you'll find my YouTube stuff. And then I've got a lot of my discoveries and links to those YouTube videos on my website, which is greatpyramid.org. Because my institute, the American Institute for Pyramid Research, is a not-for-profit institute. So I use .org. So just Great Pyramid, one word, greatpyramid.org. And I've got a pretty big following on Instagram, and there I'm at Sage Silent. So Sage Silent on Instagram, at the Great Pyramid on YouTube, and www.greatpyramid.org. Those are the best places to connect with me and find out about the discoveries and stuff.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much, Larry. Thanks for your time. It's been absolutely lovely chatting to you and hearing about all your discoveries and your views and your interests.
Melissa,
and your
and I consider you a great resource. I've come to you many times asking things. Melissa's a great storehouse of knowledge of metrology and stuff, and so I appreciate our friendship. I'm glad you had me. And I
That's
do.
very nice, and I just wanted to learn from you, and there's much more to learn. So thank you so much,
Thanks
and
again,
happy
Melissa.
solstice. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Larry. Bye.
Bye-bye.